of Environmental Policy at Transport Canada, where she leads all of the activities related to development and implementation of policies and regulations to reduce emissions and to decarbonize transportation within Canada. Also represents Canada in a number of international initiatives related to transportation. And Paula is going to speak to us on reducing emissions from on-road transportation.
Good afternoon, everyone. I really regret just arriving now. You guys seem to be having so much fun. My colleague and I, Dr. Aaron Hoskin, named all 3 songs and thought, man, we should have come earlier. This looks like a lot of fun. Yes, as noted, I'm the Director General of Environmental Policy at Transport Canada, responsible for the decarbonization of on-road transportation, marine, rail, and air transportation, as well as marine protection of endangered species as it pertains to whales in terms of shipping corridors. So today we're going to focus mostly on on-road transportation and what the Government of Canada is doing to decarbonize transportation. Do I have a clicker, or is this? Okay, great. Okay, so as noted, we're going to talk about the actions that we've been taking to reduce emissions from on-road transportation, including the suite of measures that we are using to achieve that, and setting the stage for what next. So efficient movement of people and goods is essential to a thriving economy. That said, in Canada, transportation accounts for 25% of our greenhouse gas emissions, the majority of which comes from on-road transportation. Light-duty vehicles represents almost 50% of our total emissions, and that has increased since 2005. In terms of heavy-duty transportation, again, an increase of 36%, and now we stand at 35% of our total emissions come from heavy-duty transportation, and that is on a steady increase as our population is growing, economy is growing, greater delivery of goods, and just-in-time delivery. Since 2016, the Government of Canada has taken a comprehensive approach to reducing emissions, but with a focus on electrifying transportation. Prior to that, in 2010, we had emission standards, and we're focusing mostly on energy efficiency. Now the focus is electrification. In terms of our suite of actions, we're using all the tools in the federal toolbox. We're using regulations, both to control emissions, as well as fuel regulations to ensure that the carbon intensity of our fuels used in internal combustion engines is as low as possible, as well as sales mandates for ZEVs. We're using incentives and disincentives. There is a levy on inefficient vehicles, but there's also incentives for purchasing zero-emission vehicles. We are supporting the deployment of infrastructure. We're continuing to invest in research, development, and demonstration, as we know that we need to improve the performance and lower the cost of new technologies. Awareness and training is incredibly important. All studies that we do point to this as one of the greatest ways to increase consumer confidence, ensuring that consumers are well informed and supporting them through the consumer decision-making process, from awareness to knowledge to acceptance, adoption, and then finally replication. We're leading by example in using our green procurement to invest in green technologies, but we're also taking action on our own fleet. And of course, we're supporting industry. In electrification, we want to ensure that we are also gaining in terms of economic growth and ensuring that Canada can participate in the manufacturing of these vehicles and batteries. With respect to regulations, Canada's emission reduction plan commits us to having the strongest, most stringent regulations in North America. And so that is aligning with the United States federal regulation. We've been aligning with our regulations since 2010, but now we are going to be aligning with their even more stringent ones that will come out next year for all models post-2027. And we are going to introduce for the first time a ZEV mandate, so ZEV sales regulations, mandating OEMs to have to sell as a portion of their annual fleet a certain percentage of ZEVs. So, and that is tracking to 100% by 2035, which means that OEMs by 2035 will only be able to sell electric vehicles. And there are some interim targets for that. Sales targets for 2026 is at least 20%, and by 2030, at least 60%. We're doing the same for medium and heavy-duty vehicles. And this is really where the technology is not quite as advanced, but significant effort is required. We're also regulating, sending the signal to industry that this is coming, and also to manufacturers that more variety and options in the different classes is required. So we are, again, using GHG regulations, so emission regulations on an annual basis for the fleet. So that really pushes OEMs to have to make their vehicles more fuel efficient. But then also adding on top of that a ZEV mandate, a ZEV sales mandate where OEMs producing these medium and heavy-duty vehicles must sell a certain portion of them as electric, trending to 100% by 2040, where there's the feasibility to do so. There's some classes of vehicles where you're just not going to have electric options by then. In terms of incentives, the three things that we hear that keeps consumers from purchasing zero-emission vehicles is the price point. These vehicles are more expensive. The lack of knowledge and what is called range anxiety, or the fact that they don't really understand how far these batteries go and they don't see enough charging infrastructure. Those are the three things that, doesn't matter what studies you look at, are the things that are keeping consumers from buying these vehicles. So important that we address all three. So in that, we have invested or committed over $2.3 billion in incentives. So for consumers, that means up to $5,000 on a vehicle. And in that, just this past year, we increased the number of models available for that incentive. And that's important too, because in the beginning when we were offering these incentives, there wasn't a lot of choice in the market. So consumers could say, you know what, I want to buy one, but the type of vehicle that I need for my family just isn't available. There isn't an SUV, there isn't a minivan. Well, now there is, and we're covering those vehicles as well. We now have over 35 eligible models that we are incenting, and over 195,000 Canadians and businesses have now benefited from that. We're doing the same for medium and heavy-duty vehicles, committing over $500 million in incentives. And those incentives go from anywhere from $10,000 on a Class 2B truck to $200,000 for a Class 8 truck. Again, 65 eligible models, and over 300 Canadian businesses have already benefited from putting in their orders and gaining access to this incentive. As I noted, range anxiety and the availability of infrastructure often cited as a barrier. I don't see where those chargers are. They're not close to me. I have to be able to charge everywhere that I'm accustomed to fueling. Well, that's one of the myths that we also need to correct. The reality is your electric vehicle is more like your cell phone. You charge it at home every night. And then, yes, you top it up at work, you top it up at the grocery store by using publicly available chargers. But 85% of charging will happen at home. But we do know that there are people who live in MURBs, multi-unit residential buildings, that will not have access to charging. So it is important to have a really comprehensive coast-to-coast network. Natural Resources Canada has invested with partners in the private sector, utilities, other levels of government, including the BC government, and Indigenous businesses and communities in infrastructure. $1.2 billion is being invested to put stations coast to coast, as well as hydrogen stations as well. To date, over 33,000 stations have been supported and 29 hydrogen stations. ZEV awareness and training. As I talked about the consumer continuum, ensuring that consumers have the information they need to make an informed choice. That is really what builds public confidence. So we've been running out of Natural Resources Canada a micro initiative where we partner with NGOs, with provinces, and other businesses in putting forward projects that increase the awareness and knowledge of Canadians. Things like total cost of ownership. People look at the price on one of these vehicles and get sticker shock. But what they don't understand is these vehicles are actually cheaper to operate. So over the lifetime of the vehicle actually saves you money. But that's really hard to understand. So creating tools and information products that enable consumers to really appreciate the benefit of an electric vehicle. Since, as of this year, we've already done 46 diverse projects, including in the North and Prairie Province underserved communities, to ensure that that knowledge and confidence and eventual adoption is available equity for all Canadians. I talked about ensuring that we benefit economically from this transition to electric vehicles, and that is really important. Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada has invested billions in supporting industry to ensure that they can manufacture these vehicles in Canada, that we create those good jobs in Canada, that we're able to use our metals and minerals to create those batteries in Canada. And so through the SIF Innovation Fund and the Net Zero Accelerator Fund, we have seen investments in Ford, GM, Stellantis, Lion Electric, as well as other battery investments for General Motors, for Netstar, and Unicorn. Budget 2023, just this week, again, introduced many tax credits as well as incentive programs to ensure that Canada is on the leading edge and able to manufacture and create that advantage here in Canada. A lot of complementary measures that aren't necessarily just related to the electric vehicles. For example, the clean fuel regulation that was finalized last year ensures that even the fuel that is used in conventional vehicles that we all, drive in, not everybody's driving an EV right now, is lower and continues to be lower each year. We have a trucking program as well that is accelerating and testing trucks, because that's an area where we're a little further behind than we are on EVs. We're also investing in truck retrofits, ensuring that the trucks that have been bought in the recent past that will be on the road for 15 to 20 years are also being decarbonized by ensuring that we can put energy efficiency retrofits on those trucks and lowering the emission of the current fleet that is on the road. As these trucks start to turn over, yes, the options for buying electric will be there, but we need to ensure that the fuel that Canadians are putting into their cars is that the carbon intensity of that fuel is being reduced over time. And of course, investing in innovation. Moving forward, we know we still have a lot. We know that we still have a lot to do. ZEV uptake right now is predominantly in the higher income classes. We need to ensure that there is greater availability and adoption amongst all Canadians. We need to ensure that infrastructure is being scaled up at the pace that more vehicles are being sold, ensuring that there is charging anywhere where a Canadian is looking to travel. There's also a gap for medium and heavy duty charging. You can appreciate that to charge a truck and for a truck depot, that is a very fit for purpose. That is not the same charging that you will be able to get at a Walmart or at Loblaws. Grid capacity and readiness. As we add more electric vehicles to the grid, as we add more chargers to our homes and to our neighborhoods, we're going to need to do grid upgrades. So just this week, the budget provided a lot of incentives for that. And in terms of vehicles that are on the road today, ensuring that we have ways to have those vehicles turn over more quickly. So taking the older vehicles off the road more quickly. We need to think about how do we incent that to happen. But the intent, and this is very important, the intent is not to replace every ICE vehicle with a ZEV. That is not the intent. We need to see how more effectively we can move people. Car sharing services, where one vehicle can serve many consumers, active transportation, more bike paths, more walking paths, e-bikes, as well as mass transit, ensuring that our cities have effective mass transit that is clean. We also need to ensure that our auto workers are supported and are benefiting from this transition. And that's just on-road transportation. As you noted, the emissions are about 85% from on-road transportation. We still do need to tackle the other 15%. So in terms of addressing other modes of transportation, the emission reductions plan also committed us to developing 3 other climate action plans, one for aviation, one for marine, and one for rail. And my office is leading on that work, working with the provinces, working with industry, working with international partners, and working with Indigenous right holders. We launched the first part of an aviation action plan just this last December that commits us to net zero by 2050 and at least 10% use of sustainable aviation fuel by 2030. We've made legislative amendments to the Canada Marine Act to strengthen climate planning and reporting from our ports. We published our Green Freights Corridor Framework, and just this week received $165 million to establish green shipping corridors. We are developing a proposal to create an emission control zone in the Arctic. We currently have one in the Atlantic and the Pacific, but we are now addressing emissions in the Arctic. We also are renewing our MOU with the Rail Association to look at emissions from rail. But we're not just doing this domestically. We are very active beyond our borders. I represent Canada on several international committees where we are trying to advance these initiatives and this imperative globally. In terms of under the Clean Energy Ministerial, I lead the electric vehicle initiative, was trying to accelerate global adoption of ZEVs, noting that as manufacturers get the push and as more countries implement mandates and support programs, the industry is going to respond. I also lead the hydrogen initiative that is looking to ensure that hydrogen is advanced to a global scale and is used throughout our economy and not just in transportation. Also, biofuels initiative, again, ensuring that we're advancing clean fuels. So where we cannot electrify, ensuring that we have clean fuel options. And also using opportunities such as COP, the UN Climate Change Conference, to advance some of these initiatives and get national commitments. Also working bilaterally with a lot of like-minded countries on such initiatives. In terms of next steps, well, we're going to continue to implement all of the measures that the Government of Canada has introduced. Most recently, we just launched a ZEV Council that has us working with industry and provinces, Indigenous groups, environmental organizations in helping to inform and tackle some of the challenges in ZEV deployment. The Government of Canada will be putting out its first report in terms of the Canadian Net Zero, in response to the Canadian Net Zero Accountability Act. And of course, we've got the 3 decarbonization plans that we're doing. Tackling emissions from transportation is no small feat. Obviously, the type of equipment and the infrastructure required will require billions of dollars. But it also requires ensuring that Canadians and businesses are ready for the transition and are convinced that this is what we need to do. And in that, we really need to take a full ecosystem approach, ensuring that we're addressing infrastructure and cost and availability and charging and grid readiness, ensuring that we're covering the entire landscape. And with that, I'll just end there and happy to take questions.
Sure, there's questions, so please raise your hand and we'll bring a mic to you.
Yours was the first hand.
You were mentioning the fact that EVs are mostly being purchased by higher income households. Is there any exploration looking at making the incentives for EVs means tested so that they're more available or they're more accessed by middle and low income households?
Yeah, so certainly we understand that BC has taken that approach, and other jurisdictions, subnational governments have as well. It is something that we are looking at. One of the things that we do in all of our programming is usually, let's say we have a 5-year program, halfway through we do an interim evaluation in terms of what's working, what's not working, where we can do some course correction, where we can do some redesign. So just last year, we redesigned certain aspects of it because we knew that it was hitting the mark in terms of availability of vehicles that would be eligible. The higher end vehicles, meaning higher end not in purchase price but in size, SUVs, were not fitting within the price point. So those adjustments were made. Income testing is one of the things we're looking at. How can we and maybe it may not be an income test, but try to achieve the same outcome where these vehicles become more accessible to lower income Canadians. We also need to ensure that we just have more of them available. One of the things we're tackling now is 6 to 8 month, sometimes 12-month waiting lists. We understand that we do have supply chain issues, and that even ICE vehicles, regular conventional vehicles, are difficult to get. Where you used to be able to get a vehicle in 2 days, now you might have to wait 3-4 months to get, even a standard vehicle. So greater availability and different price points. That's another thing too. Really pushing the OEMs to offer a diversity of vehicles at different price points, because that helps as well. It's a $5,000 incentive. It can be coupled with provincial incentives as well, and sometimes some municipalities have incentives, so like you're starting to really stack up the incentives, but also having, pushing OEMs to have vehicles in a diversity of classes. The prices are also coming down, right? Like when we first introduced these vehicles, they were very expensive. Now, the cost of some of these vehicles is much more reasonable. So those are all ways that you can try to address ensuring that there's greater access to all Canadians.
You have a regulation making sure that a certain percentage of ZEVs are sold per year, hitting different milestones. What is the reason for having that, and then also having a ZEV incentive? It seems sort of like you're reimbursing on both sides, perhaps.
So the ZEV incentive is to make them more affordable for Canadians. But in order to make them more affordable for Canadians, we need to make sure they're available. So the incentive is the $5,000 is directed at Canadians, ensuring that there's greater accessibility for Canadians and that they're more affordable. The other measure is really directed at OEMs to ensure that they are putting those vehicles in Canada. So right now, what we have noticed in the analysis is jurisdictions with these sales mandates tend to draw from the mothership, as we call it, Japan, or wherever the vehicles are coming from. They tend to draw greater numbers of vehicles to their market, to their lots for sale. And we want Canadians to have the greatest choice of vehicles and actually have access to these vehicles. So the sales mandate is really directed at the OEMs, ensuring that they bring in and they sell a certain number of vehicles. It's about availability, whereas the other one is about affordability.
Yeah, thank you very much. We heard some other speakers speak about size of vehicles, and as the size of vehicles go up, we have more brake wear and more tire wear. Heavier electric vehicles with heavy batteries having more wear and tear on the roads. Is that anything that's being looked at in terms of regulations or limitations of size of vehicles on the road?
Yeah. So weights and measures is regulated, and certainly for trucks it is, because wear and tear on roads. But in the case of light-duty vehicles, vehicles become much more efficient the lighter they are. So there is a whole set of research, development, and demonstrations happening on lightweighting. So lightweighting the vehicle itself, all aspects of the vehicle, all component parts, but also batteries. and battery weight. Battery weight is even more a greater impact when you look at trucking, because trucking is, it really is the weight of the goods on the truck that you need. It is for payload, not for batteries. So that is one of the reasons why big battery packs, we won't see, unlikely to see that being taking off in terms of big battery packs for 18-wheelers. What you're going to get probably is hydrogen solutions for those, because you cannot use your entire weight allocation for batteries instead of payload. It's not economical. So yes, absolutely. And it isn't only, in terms of wear and tear on roads, it's actually fuel efficiency, or in this case, energy efficiency of the vehicle. The lighter it is, the better it is.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think you mentioned toward the end that the solution obviously is not everyone has an EV, but there's a strong recognition that active transportation, public transit systems, or e-bikes are part of the solution. Do you mind sharing with us the money that is associated with those kind of initiatives?
Yeah, so I had on the slides that we had all the complementary measures, the transit, the bus, the school buses, incentives for school buses, incentive for other infrastructure for buses and school buses. That is incredibly important, because we not only need effective public transportation, but it needs to be clean as well. So we are investing as well. I think it's actually I'll look on the slide anyway. It was on one of my slides. Also hundreds of millions of dollars in buses, and the cities are able to partake in the programs. Different municipal. We also work with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities to ensure that they have access to these. Where did I have my bus? Complimentary, but here we go. 2.75 billion, so just under $3 billion being spent to support the purchase of electric public buses and school buses.
Thanks. I'm going to divert my question. Actually, as a follow-up, is there any money being spent on active transportation?
So active transportation is kind of one of those last pillars that we're addressing, and it is something that we're looking at now, the most optimal way to move people, and how we can embed some of that into city planning to ensure that we are getting the bike lanes. And a lot of progress has been made in that. It's really a municipal thing, but we also do have federal departments looking at that. Active transportation, what role can we play in working with provinces and municipalities to ensure that that becomes part of city planning, that we have safe, dedicated bike lanes, walking lanes as well to promote active transportation.
Take one more question if there is one.
Oh, one more.
Is there any study that show where that $5,000 comes from? Like what's supposed to balance that $5,000? And is there any study that shows that that incentive is actually making any difference on the decision of people getting in the car? Because right now you have to just put down your money and wait 2 years, in line, and that $5,000, and then how that plays into the equity role, like how we're distributing that money into all Canadians, not only the people that are capable of purchasing Tesla, right? And $2.3 billion, is there any study that shows that if we spend that, for example, on public transit or active transportation, we get better GHG reduction and less, perhaps, vehicles on the road?
Great questions. You were allowed one. I think you asked me 6. Okay, so try to tackle all those. The 5,000, yes, it was very carefully assessed in that we knew in many jurisdictions it would be aligned also with what was happening provincially. So when you're looking at the price differential between, let's say, an electric Honda Civic and a Honda, like two competing vehicles, the price differential and then splitting it, because obviously we're not going to be using we want to encourage provinces to also step up to the plate, so Canada's not going to offer the entire differential. So that really was calculating that, and in most cases where provinces have, you're receiving 5 from Canada, you may be receiving 7 from your province, or 8 in the case of Quebec, so it actually is amounting to a good proportion of the manufacturer retail sales price of the vehicle. Your other question in terms of investing that money in something else, well, we are investing in something else. We need to ensure that we are addressing all on-road transportation and not putting our eggs in one basket. So we are doing the buses, we are doing the school buses, we're doing the trucks, we're doing the electric vehicles. We need to accelerate the transition in order to meet our climate imperative. And time is of the essence. And that is why you see all of these tax measures, why you see all of these investments. These are public funds, so we do not take spending public funds lightly. But we are, really attacking this from all fronts, ensuring that businesses, Canadians, all have access to this. Buses, bus authorities and so forth. So it is really important that we, ensure that we are investing in all aspects of the value chain.
Okay, thanks.
Well, thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you. Oh.